I have news for you. As much as I love Bach, I also love the romantic pianists of the late 19th century. I'm fascinated with the playing style of that period. And I printed out one more edition for you. This is the Czerny edition. This fingering is not fingering I would use at all. And the butler did it. And apparently the motion was chef's kiss. Grace of motion. Okay, so we're looking at the sidewalk. I got my hockey stick here as a pointer stick. You can see I wrote down a lot of numbers, plus a message for the pigeons. Well, hi guys. Here I am at the basketball courts at a school by my house. I took some sidewalk chalk. We're going to do Bach in chalk. Specifically, I'm showing you the invertible counterpoint as it occurs in the little prelude in E major. And check out these numbers. Well, hello there. Welcome back to my practice room. It's me, Penny. Thanks for joining me for this practice tutorial devoted to the Little Prelude number 5 in E major by Johann Sebastian Bach. This is BWV 937, music from 1720. And this is a little two-part binary form piece, 20 bars in length, 10 plus 10. And as you saw in the intro, we are going to be going outside in a little while with some sidewalk chalk. We'll leave some messages for the pigeons on the basketball court. Messages concerning the invertible counterpoint as it occurs in this piece. There's just a couple of instances where invertible counterpoint occurs. I noticed it as I was practicing it, and I thought, hey, I can show this at the playground. So we'll get to that shortly, but we need to just look at the piece as a whole to start with. So get your pencil out. Hopefully you have the sheet music. If not, I've linked it in the description. You can print a copy for free or just follow along on your tablet or your iPad, whatever you've got. Because I got a lot to share. I'm going to be sharing not just the invertible counterpoint, but also my fingering and some of the macro as well as some of the micro notes, various things that I listen for, in other words, the various entries of the main theme, other points of interest along the way, as well as some of the technical sorts of challenges that I think this piece poses to the player. Now, this piece is not a really advanced piece. It's also not an easy piece. It's kind of in the middle, you know. I would say this is a late intermediate, kind of a more or less kind of a piece with maybe hints of early advanced. Here in Canada, this piece falls in the level 8 syllabus from the Royal Conservatory of Music. Level 8 curriculum, rather. So let's dive in and look at some basics, and then we'll go outside and take a little break and look at the counterpoint. Okay, so if you've got your pencil handy, let's look at the score now and see what we've got going on. This piece begins with a kind of a subject in the right hand. Sounds like this. That is the main idea of the piece, and is therefore what gets tossed around in the other hand and in that same hand, but in different harmonic regions. I'm going to call that the subject, because let's face it, even though the word subject refers to the beginning of a fugue, this little prelude in E major, it's a wannabe fugue, right? It's a fugue in training. It's like the teenager fugue. En route, on destination to becoming a wonderful, exciting 4 or maybe even 5-voiced fugue. So that is the main idea of this piece, that subject. Let's go over the other entries of that subject right now. Okay, so here you've got an overhead view as I mark in the subject entries. There's one that's the first one of the piece in our right hand there. The next one occurs in the left hand. That's at measure 3. And let's see, then we got one in the right hand, measure 5. You can see it there, C sharp to F sharp. The first two notes of these subject entries, there's another one, measure 6 in the left hand, E to A. They're all a kind of a 5-1. Same with that one there. Right hand, measure 7. Okay, now we're over to the B section, and we have an entry there in our left hand, measure 11. And this is a binary form piece. So A and B sections. Our next one there is in measure 14. That's in the right hand. Then, shortly after that, and that one was minor, by the way. Then in measure 15, I believe it is, 15, we have an entry in the left hand, C sharp to F sharp. And of course, our A section is in the tonic, our B section begins in the dominant, and we return at the end to the tonic of E major. Just marking in the word subject there. I'm using a pen here, and I used different color markers. That was so that you could see and so that I could have color. But I always use, for my own practicing, just pencil. And I would recommend the same to anyone else, because we're not perfect. There will be mistakes, and you want to be able to erase them. It's a bummer when you got to dig the white out onto your page. We got a little dominant pedal tone there, dominant being the 5th note of the scale. B is the 5th of E major, our home key. And let's see, I got so many notes here. There are 8 entries in total. 4 in the right hand, 4 in the left hand. And so that's kind of nice, very fair. Those numbers in the middle, that's we're going to get to those very shortly, as well as the fingering. What you see me marking in right now is original subject. So that's just the exact same notes as the original statement in measure 1. Some of these other subjects have been slightly altered, like the left hand in measure 11 is the 3rd and 4th notes, they go down instead of up. And there's a few of them that are a little shorter than the original subject. So, but that's the main idea. The entry there, measure 16, is minor. We do have a little sequential moment that happens in the second half of measure 17. There, good. My hand is writing it in. I'm trying to figure out how to sync the voiceovers with the pre-recorded bits and all this stuff. But yeah, little sequence there, 17 and 18. That's a nice little way to finish off the piece. And that's it for this little chunk. All right, so now we're going to look at, very briefly, the chromatic saturation, which is just simply the amount the amount of notes from the 12-note chromatic scale that get used in a piece. So our piece is in E major. I've written out the chromatic scale starting on E. There's 12 pitches, and all of them are present in this piece except the 4th one, and that is G natural. So this little prelude in E major has no G naturals. That gives us a chromatic saturation of 11 out of 12. And if you want to find out much more about the chromatic saturation in Bach, you can check out these 2 videos up in the card section. Okay, so here we are back at the piano. I've got lots more data for you, but let's just have a listen to what we've looked at so far. That is mainly the entries of the subject. And we said that there were 8 of them, 4 in the right hand and 4 in the left. So here we go, starting with the right hand. It has our first statement. Then our left hand has it. And I'm trying to bring these subjects out more and pull down the volume, pull down the shade on the other hand. Okay? So here's our left hand subject, measure 3. Then our right hand has it, measure 5. Then our left hand has it, measure 6. Then the right hand, measure 7. This one is exactly the same as the original. And that's it for this A section. Just 2 bars of a pedal tone on the note B, which is our dominant, to finish out this A section. This is measure 9 and 10. Phew! 10 bars, A section. There they are. We had 1, 2, 3 statements in the right and 2 in the left, followed by the pedal tone. Now the second half of the piece, here we go. This is our B section, starting in the dominant, which is B major, and the first one up at bat is our left hand there. It's got the subject with a slight little alteration in the middle of going down instead of up. This is measure 11. Here we go. And now here, measure 12 and 13, we don't have any statements of the subject here. Although it kind of sounds familiar, there's little remnants of it. You know, this hopping around these broken triad kind of things with the 16ths in the other part. But no actual statements of the subject here, measure 12 and 13. So let's listen to those. And we've still got that B pedal tone, that dominant pedal tone in the left hand, which began at measure 9. So that's quite a long one. Here we go, measure 12. Okay, here at measure 14, we got a little subject statement in the right hand, and this one has a minor kind of sound to it to me. Then at 15, we get the left hand. Now here we are in the middle of 17, and through the next bar, 18, into the very beginning of 19, we have a little sequential moment. Down a step. Down a step. We think it's going to go again, but that's it. And then we've got 2 more bars to finish off the piece. We got no more statements of the subject. Basically, it's just tonic, dominant, tonic. So here's the last 2 bars. E major. Dominant, tonic. Right? So that's just a little snapshot. I am not, as I always say, and I will keep saying it because it's true, I am not a theory professional. I'm a music theorist or a composer, but I have some theory knowledge, and I apply it from the perspective of a pianist so that I can find my way, because when you're starting a new piece, it's kind of like you're in the dark. You know, you're trying to find your way, and when you get your bearings and you're using all of your senses and thinking intelligently and really concentrating, applying what skill you do have, even if it's just a little bit of theory, you'd be surprised what you can find out. And good taste, too. Using good taste is essential. I had written down, as you know, or maybe you don't know, if you're new to my channel, hello, and thanks for being here. And I have news for you. As much as I love Bach, I also love the romantic pianists of the late 19th century up to the the First World War, kind of this area. It's been called the golden age of pianism, and I'm fascinated with the playing style of the pianists of that period, many of whom were students of Franz Liszt or Theodor Leschetizky, Frédéric Chopin even, and some of his students. And the way they played was just so individual and so expressive and absolutely beautiful. It's very hard to find playing of that kind anymore. So that is very much a part of my interests and my passions when I'm playing Bach's music, even though this is not romantic music, but you can still be romantic in Bach. You can, in a quiet way. That's what I like. But I had come across, because we were talking about when you start a new piece, and it's kind of like you're groping and finding your way, in a dark forest or whatever, and then you get little clues, and here's a piece of information. Okay, and here's another one. Then you like gradually put them in your little Halloween treat bag, and I got a lot of tips in there, right? And then that's how you get going. But I came across a couple really golden nuggets of information that I wanted to share along the way, because as I say, I'm very passionate about piano playing and the players of long ago, and some of the advice that they left by way of books and memoirs and things like this. And one of my favorite piano teachers was Theodor Leschetizky, and he used to say that to play the piano, one must have grace of motion, a quick eye, a good ear, but above all, intelligence, and a little tiny bit of feeling. Ever so little of that will keep you from pounding the piano. And that, to me, is gold, because it's not just about finding the sequences and the invertible counterpoint, and this motive gets inverted, and then that motive, and then we got a pedal tone, and then these macro notes, and we got so much architecture, but it's like not pleasant to look at or to listen to. I think it's important to always be mindful of the quality of your touch and tone at the piano. So even when you're groping in the early stages of learning a piece, be mindful of making quality sound so that you're never, what was it, this same teacher, Theodor Leschetizky, talking about some of these students who pound the piano, and he said they'd be better off in a gymnasium, pounding. Called them wood choppers. And there was another wonderful tip too, which I just can't resist throwing these in. I'm not the most practical piano teacher or person in the world. When I get passionate about something, I want to share it, whether it's like practical or not, and this, even though this little piece we're working on doesn't have major jumping around or major leaps kind of thing, but still, it is kind of difficult, and we'll get into some of the technical difficulties of that piece, namely with this 16th notes as they go from hand to hand, and trying to maintain clarity and evenness of articulation, and it truly requires a lot of cooperation from the whole body, like not just your finger doing the work, but your wrist, your hand, the various parts of your arm, all of these things, and good transportation. And this quote, on getting grace of motion at the piano, which is one of the things that any pianist must have, as we just heard, according to Theodor Leschetizky. And he told the story, this is for how to get grace of motion at the piano. When you have to move from one end of the keyboard to the next, how do you do it gracefully, right? Well, there was this story, and I got these stories, by the way, these quotes and so forth, from this book, Leschetizky as I Knew Him, and it was written by Ethel Newcomb, who was one of his students in Vienna in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And she's a wonderful writer. It's a very good book. And apparently, Leschetizky, who used to hold classes at his home, and they were infamous events, he called upon, because I guess he was having a student who was kind of pounding the piano and just not listening and not, he was getting frustrated. So he called in his butler. And the butler apparently had no musical skill, could not play the piano. I don't even think he could read music. I gather that he was just completely starting from zero. And Leschetizky called the butler over, and the butler was like, oh no, in front of all this master teacher and all of his, protege students, what does he want me to do? Let me go back to the kitchen. And Leschetizky had the butler put his left hand on the bottom, some bass keys on the piano, and Leschetizky showed the butler to just, position the hand in such a way that one of the fingers was a little bit longer than the others. I'm imagining a third finger on a D sharp. I mean, what can you do with someone who's never played before when you're making a one-time trying to make a point, right? There's not so much you can do. So, he had the butler put his hand down there on a note. Okay, and the butler's like really nervous because he's never played the piano before and he doesn't know what's coming next. And Leschetizky told the butler so his hand was down, and he said, okay, now do not look at your left hand anymore. And instead, look up at the top, somewhere up at the top of the piano. I'm going to look at this F sharp right here, right? He told the butler to do this. Look at the top, and then let your left hand come up to the note up top. But don't play it. Just make the leap. Not looking at your left hand, just looking at the top. And the butler did it. And apparently the motion was chef's kiss. Grace of motion. To have been a bug on the wall that day in that house. Those kinds of lessons are essential. Transportation at the piano, how you get from one key to the next, whether it's getting from there all the way up to the top or just by half step, making it not only sound graceful and beautiful, but also look graceful too. And I thought that was a wonderful way, just get your left hand down there, pick a spot up at top, and just go to it, keeping your eye on the top, and maybe film yourself or put a mirror by your piano so you can see your movements too. Because as Leschetizky says here, to recap, the piano player must have grace of motion, a quick eye, a good ear, and above all, intelligence and a little bit of feeling. And regarding feeling, because, and I see some other videos and various tutorials and comments that people leave, and oftentimes people talk about how to play musically and how to play expressively. And that to me is a bit of a head scratcher because it's such a subjective thing. Calling on Leschetizky again here, because he's a couple of these quotes from him. Don't ask me what it means. The music means what it says to you, right? If you are feeling something in the music, whether it's music you listen to or music that you're playing, even though your fingers may be kind of gnarly and stiff and, but you're still feeling something, then that is expressive playing. Maybe it's not skillful artistic playing, but the music is moving you. No performance will move every single person. Calling on Leschetizky again here, he once said that where one person laughs, another is serious. And this is interpretation. Some teachers can say to a student, you need to play with more expression. Or I had a teacher tell me once when I was at a music camp in Quebec. Is a very famous piano teacher, and he says, you don't have enough life experience to feel this music. You haven't lived enough. And I thought, I think actually at the time I took it kind of seriously, because I can be a little naive and I always assume that I'm wrong when someone tells me something and they must be right. But even then, at the time, it kind of made me feel a little bit icky, like, and now I think back on it, and I really feel like that was not a effective moment for that teacher. That was not good teaching. Goodness knows how many other students have been told similar things, that you don't feel the music, or you haven't lived in. I've even heard adjudicators say that to other students. It makes me very angry to hear a student be told, you haven't experienced enough in your life to be able to play this music. Well, if the student is got very poor technical equipment and they're playing Rachmaninoff Third Concerto, well, then they're putting the cart before the horse. But that's a whole separate ballgame from saying you haven't lived enough, you haven't experienced enough, as if just because a person is old means that they have so much more to say, is completely not true at all. And so these are just things to think about and play in a way that moves you. It's very hard to have a career in music, and playing beautifully, playing to communicate through sound, playing to move yourself to tears. I have asked some people before in various presentations. I used to give some library presentations, and I would say, how many of you can recall a time when you were moved to tears by a work of art, by a work of music? And there were always a few hands that did not go up, a few folks that had not experienced that, which was a shock to me. But playing expressively comes differently to everyone, but the essential ingredients of a quick eye, a good ear, intelligence, grace of motion, and a little bit of feeling, these are essential, absolutely essential. I think as well, Leschetizky used to talk about the importance of listening at the piano, and one of his students taught my teacher, and she actually had several teachers. My teacher, Constance Keene, her main teacher was her husband, Abram Chasens, who was a student of Joseph Hoffman. Hoffman studied with Anton Rubinstein, but Constance Keene, my teacher, had also studied with Lotta Mills Huff, I believe was her name, who had studied with Leschetizky. And it was from her that my teacher picked up some of these other qualities, and particularly about diction and speaking. And Leschetizky talked about that. In fact, he referenced people from like Polish people in particular. And there have been so many fine romantic pianists in particular of that ethnicity. And so this idea of enunciation, diction, and of vocal quality was very important to Leschetizky. It's very important to me. I feel like if you can speak clearly and have inflection in your voice and be thoughtful about your diction and enunciation, the cadence of your voice, the volume, the various stresses and releases and things that you do with your voice, that is all helpful for articulation and phrasing at the piano. Leschetizky also used to say about the English speakers and how we ought to, all of us, study Italian. Why was that? So that we can use our lips more. Yeah, we ought all to study Italian to learn to move the lips. And he wondered why the English speakers did not smile when they spoke. You know, if you're not doing these things, then consider doing them, because it could, probably will, help with your piano playing. It's all related. I think it was Harold Bauer who'd said something to the tune of, I can study everything in anything. You can study piano phrasing by listening to a great orator or someone with a beautiful speaking voice. Singers, too, listening to great singers, or better yet, getting to accompany a great singer. That is a true privilege for any pianist, I must say. Oh, yeah, and then the one other little related quote from him, because people would come to him for lessons. I'm totally getting off tangent here, right? The little prelude. It's waiting patiently. But people would come to Leschetizky from all over, teachers even, and they would watch and they would take notes on his teaching. And then Leschetizky would get curious, like, could I see what you're writing down? I'm just very curious. And he would look at their notes, and they had literally written down, specific actual quotes that he said about what he was thinking of in a particular passage. But his point to them was that, the music means something to me, and it will mean something very different to you. And you will probably never know what the music means to me. But he also added this: if you ask me how to play emotionally, then my answer will be, if you have to ask me that question, you can never play emotionally. We're all feeling beings, right? Hopefully. So it's if you feel, then you can play. And we don't need to ask that question. You feel, therefore you play. So let's get back to this little prelude now. We're going to go back to the table and look at the sheet music for some more data that I gathered. Okay, so we're looking at fingering, and on the right side is some fingering from another person that I've seen used. I marked it down, and then on the left is a copy of the same sheet music with my own fingering. So I got an orange marker here, and in orange, those finger numbers are the places where I use the same fingering as this other person. And so in pink, then, those are the finger numbers that are different from my own, and it's mostly in the right hand. So in places like here, measure 3 and 4 in particular, there's a lot of pink. So these places where there's pink are primarily spots where the notes are moving by step, or fairly close together, moving in a stepwise fashion. So you might need to zoom up your screen a little bit. I'm showing here about the thumb and how in my own fingering I do not cross the thumb over, or rather under, onto a black key. I'm writing it there so you can see. So I do not cross my thumb under on a black key. However, the fingering on the right, this person does. And there are some places there. I'm going to mark it in. I think it's measure 3 in the right hand. There's a G sharp. Come on, girl, write it in. There you go. So this person crosses their thumb under on a black key. That feels strange to me. That whole passage feels strange, that fingering. And then they do it again in measure 6. The thumb crosses over on a black note. It's the F sharp at the end of measure 6. This is the right hand. Most of the left hand is the same in both of these versions. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. What else have we got here? As I say, it's mostly movement by step where the fingering changes. When the left hand is doing its quasi-Alberti bass kind of motion with the leaps. I'm trying to indicate things here on the score with my hand. Excuse me, and it's not working terribly well. But generally, the left hand, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. Okay, I'm back. So the left hand is usually, there are not many options when you have to play an octave. It's 1 and 5, right? So anyway, you can explore this at your leisure and see what works for you. As I've said before in a fingering video, and I'll link that in a card, I do try to use fingering that promotes constant use of the hand. As well, I try to avoid using primarily fingers 1, 2, and 3, the thumb, index finger, and third finger. I try to use as much of the whole hand as possible. And using fresh fingers. So if you have a repeated note, maybe don't play it with the same finger both times. Or repeated passage work, I try to change up my fingerings as much as possible because it keeps the arm and hand loose and relaxed. And so therefore the quality of your touch and tone is better. And I just wrote in on the page there that this other fingering on the right seems to me to have much repetition of fingers. Another thing that I noticed in preparing these fingerings for you, in addition to use of the constant movement of the hand, is that I tend to like my pads of my fingers, the fleshy part there that I'm showing you, I like them close together as much as possible because I feel it gives me just so much more control in these 16th note passages where the notes are close together. So, I like fingering that keeps the hand closed but not tight. And when you open your hand, so it's like, the little shadow puppets. But this idea of opening your hand wide and rotating it open to the side and then crossing over as a brisk motion. You can practice that by holding your thumb down and just exercising the hand, making these shooting star kind of opening and closing gestures. So I think that's enough about the fingering for now. Let's go back and check on one more thing related to that. Okay, so as you can see, I am no drawing expert here. Tried to draw my left and right hands there because I've got some data here. Yes, I gathered major data for this video and something that I've never done before, which you're seeing here, and that is I calculated which finger gets used the most on each hand for this little prelude in E major. So in the left hand, I'll wait till I finish there. If you can tell which finger is the thumb, they all kind of look the same. I've been dipping into the licorice, looks like, the black licorice. So in the left hand there, the thumb gets used more than any of my other left hand fingers, 36% of the time. Then my second finger, 30% of the time, and then my third finger, 13% of the time. And in the right hand, actually, it's my second finger that gets used the most. That's at 28%, followed by my third finger, which gets used 22% of the time, and then my thumb, which gets used. I just noticed I put 19th by the right hand thumb. Sorry, that should be percent. In my right hand, my fourth finger gets used 17% of the time, and my fifth finger, my little pinky on the right hand, gets used 14% of the time. In the left hand, my finger 4 is used 10% of the time, and my little pinky, finger 5, used 11% of the time. And in this short little clip, I wanted to show you, I printed out the Busoni edition of the piece, which doesn't have much fingering, just that one spot there in measure 3. But he's got 1, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2 in the right hand, which I find so uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable, rather, but risky. It feels precarious and dangerous. And then in my copy, instead, I use 1-3-4-1, 4-3-2-1. He uses 1-4-5-4. I just feel like having the little fifth finger on the C sharp, it's a bit of a stretch and it's not a strong finger, just kind of risky. And I printed out one more edition for you. This is the Czerny edition, Carl Czerny, of course. This fingering is not fingering I would use at all. Like measure 11 there in the right hand. F sharp, E, F sharp. He's got 3-1-3. Oh, and then measure 13, B, A, B in the right hand, 1-2-1. Just an unnecessary crossover there. At that spot, measure 13, I use 2-1-2. They're adjacent fingers, but, try to avoid a cross-under or crossover whenever you can. I don't subscribe to the Czerny edition, at least not for Bach, because it's so littered with dynamics and articulation and things that are not in the Urtext, the original edition. We want the music as Mr. B wrote it. Those are wonderful to compare, all of these other editions. They're useful for getting ideas, but, go to the source. Okay, so we're back at the piano, and it's almost time to go to the park with our sidewalk chalk. You know that means the next topic in this little tutorial is invertible counterpoint. And I noticed it happens twice in this piece. If you find more instance of it, do let me know in the comments, because as I say, I'm not a theory or counterpoint teacher. I have some skills, and I'm approaching these things as a pianist. But without giving away the definition first thing, because if there's one thing I learned from my theory pedagogy class at the Eastman School, is that you want to let the student experience the concept before you tell them what it is. So this passage here at the beginning measures 1, 2, and then the first couple notes of measure 3. This is the first passage I want to show you. Sounds like this. Or if you're swinging it like I did in that other video. Right? It's amazing how Bach's music lends itself to being swung. Not all of it, but a good amount of it. So that passage there where we had the subject in the right hand, and then this business in the left hand with the 16ths. That is special because that's going to form the basis of the first instance of invertible counterpoint, which happens immediately after this passage. So for the rest of measure 3, all of measure 4, and the first 2 notes of measure 5. That's a total of 32 notes, right? So this passage here, measure 3, and you notice it's the left hand that has the 8th notes. The left hand's got the subject. So that is the invertible counterpoint of the other one. The original one more time. And the invertible counterpoint. Right? So you've heard it, you got it in your ear, you've seen the sheet music. You know that it begins with the right hand in the 8th notes, left hand 16ths, and then in that other passage, the hands switch. And this is invertible counterpoint. Why? Well, I'm going to show you at the park now. We're going to take our sidewalk chalk and we're looking at intervals. Okay? So let's go to the park and then we'll check back in with the sheet music and some more data. Oh yeah, and I should add, what is invertible counterpoint? Well, first of all, think about intervals in this tonal music that we play. When you have an interval such as a third, let's say, and you invert it, you get a 6th. When you have a 4th, you invert that, you get a 5th. You have a second, you invert that, you get a seventh. So what is the clue there? What do you notice? 4 and 5, 6 and 3, 7 and 2, right? They add up to 9. So when you invert an interval, it adds to 9. Now we're not looking at the exact quality of interval, whether it's major or minor, perfect or augmented or diminished, none of that. Just simply the type of interval, the number. Is it a third, a fifth, a fourth, whatever. And remember, when it's inverted, when an interval is inverted, the two will add up to 9. So, with invertible counterpoint, this occurs when you get 9 in a passage, in two different passages, where the hands, or the voices rather, the parts in this polyphonic music have been switched. Okay, so we're looking at the sidewalk. I got my hockey stick here as a pointer stick. You can see I wrote down a lot of numbers, plus a message for the pigeons. So that top number, measure 1 to 3. If you just count the basic interval between those notes, in those two parts, these are the numbers that you get, right, all the way down there. I wrote these numbers big, but there's not that many notes. It's just 2 bars, really. And you can see there's a lot of sixths, a lot of thirds, mostly thirds, actually. Fifths and fourths, a fair bit. Not too many seconds and sevenths. Okay, so this top line, then, is measure 1 to 3. Now, that is not invertible counterpoint by itself. We have to have another passage, which, when the parts are flipped, we get the inversion of each of those intervals, right? So the passage then in this bottom row, which is measure 3 to 5, you can see that these numbers, third, fourth, third, eighth, etc., and 8 just sort of cancels out. It's the same thing. Octave or unison, 8 plus 1 is 9. But you can see each of these numbers. I'm holding the phone in one hand and the hockey stick in another. The ringette coach would be so pleased, right? Each of these numbers adds up to 9. And in this top row, this was measure 1 to 3. That's where the right hand had the 8th notes and the left hand had the 16ths. Then, in the invertible counterpoint, measure 3 to 5, it was the opposite. The left hand had the 8th notes and the right hand had the 16ths. So this is, very, very fun to discover. By no means am I an expert at this. I just happen to notice occasionally in the pieces I play when this happens. So you can see, everything adds up to 9. There were some passages where I thought it was going to work, but it didn't. But this one, measure 1 to 3, and then 3 to 5, does indeed invert. There's another passage in the piece, but, well, my knees were sore on this hot pavement, so I figured, show you the one, then that's enough. Eh? Isn't that a great shot? This is Counterpoint in Canada. All right. Okay, so we're back at the desk here, and you can see those numbers that I had written down on the sidewalk. It's like a long phone number, 656-865-3634. Right? Here with my purple pen, I'm marking in the first, the first 32 notes. And those numbers there, that's just the interval, the basic type of interval between the two parts. So I'm just marking off in pink here the invertible counterpoint of the purple section. So you can see exactly what we saw, 32 notes, there they are. They end with a 6th and a 3rd. The purple ended with a 3rd and a 6th. And as we saw outside, these intervals, when you invert them, they add up to 9. Pretty clever, right? So, there's a lot of hand movement going on here. Well, we're trying to improve our skills. But now, We at the sidewalk, we only looked at that first instance of the invertible counterpoint. I'd have done this other one that I'm going to mark in green, except that the pavement was really hot and rough, and my knees, took a long time to write those numbers in chalk. But this is the other example of or instance of this invertible counterpoint. The green that I just marked in, which goes for 16 notes, that begins very near the beginning of measure 5. It goes just into the very beginning of measure 6, and then the orange there from measure 6 to 7 is the invertible counterpoint. So again, the green and the orange, they add up to 9. Purple and pink add up to 9. This is our invertible counterpoint. And now I'm just going to show you some more data that I collected. The intervals used, the percentage of intervals. You could glean from the sidewalk alone that this piece uses mostly thirds and sixths. But I thought, hey, what the heck? I'll do a full-on calculation just so you have the data here. I never do this when I'm practicing. Well, that's not true. Sometimes I do a little bit of this for my own practicing. But in trying to share these ideas with you, I'm feeling that it might be helpful. So you can see then that not very many seconds are used, right? And of course, those are dissonant intervals. There's a clash there. Only 4% of the intervals used in this piece are seconds. Sevenths, which are also dissonant, and those are inverted, right? Second and seventh, they add to 9. Only 4% of the piece are sevenths. The piece is mostly thirds. 27% of the intervals in this piece are thirds. Thirds and sixths here, which I'm also putting a square around, those are the second most used intervals. 25% of the intervals in this piece are sixths. Thirds and sixths are very warm consonant intervals. Bach uses those an awful lot. Next up are the fifths. 17% of the intervals in this piece are fifths. And then fourths. So those are at 12%, followed by the octaves, 11%, and sevenths, 4%. Okay, and now we're going to look at what I consider to be the macro notes, or the bare essential notes, the skeletal notes of this musical structure. I've been putting up some videos lately, and I'll link a few for you, where I sing the macro notes as I practice. And so I'm marking them in blue, and these are notes that I would sing as I play. So you see, I've just highlighted the E. To start things off. And that E is, to me, is the essential note, basically, for the first 2 bars. All of that, to my ear, is E, followed by B at measure 3 to 4, F sharp there at measure 5, E again at measure 6, and that one continues through 7 and 8 as well. So I feel that these are the underlying notes, despite all the other notes going on between. Then it moves to B in measure 9. That's where we had the pedal tone, as we saw earlier. And that pedal tone, that B, continues all the way to 13, where we get C sharp, I hear, in 13 as the essential note, moving to B in the middle of that bar, then to A in 14, and back to B in the middle of 14, then to F sharp in 15. That continues through 15 and 16. Then in 17, I'm hearing E as the essential note. And then in the middle of 17, I'm hearing A. Most of this is movement by step or movement by fourth or fifth kind of thing. Then G sharp in 18, F sharp in the middle of 18, E in 19, and then finally our dominant B in the last bar, 20, going to the tonic E at the very end. And here I'm just drawing in arrows. And my apology, the marker is starting to die. It barely made it through this exercise here. But when I play the piece, and you'll hear me do it in a moment, I sing each of those letter names for the length of the arrow, because in my ear I want to try to hear and sustain those essential notes for that whole duration. I feel that it helps to create more intensity to the playing, to the shaping of phrases, when I'm hearing one main note amidst a sea of many others. And it gets particularly flavorful to the ear when the music starts to move chromatically. This is really not much of a chromatic piece at all, so it's not a great example in that regard. But nevertheless, you'll get the idea. I'm going to sing it now for you and play it at the same time. Okay, I'm going to sing those macro level notes right now as I play. My focus is into the listening and the singing of these essential skeletal or macro notes, as I like to call them. Okay, and we'll look at some more micro in a moment. But here we go with our macro notes. All right, so, and forgive my voice, I am no singer by any stretch of the imagination. It's very helpful, though, to practice this way, and it's also very calming, too. You should try it. So E, here we go. La, I just use la. That's comfortable for me. Sometimes you need a sip of water before you do this, though. Okay. La. And now we're going to look at some, I guess you could call it micronotes, for lack of a better word. More melodic movement, a little bit more notes than just those bare essentials, but still leaving out some notes, leaving out repeated notes and things like that. So I've got a red pen here. Hopefully you can see that. My nickname is Pen, by the way. We only had so many colors here for this tutorial, and I know it looks like I'm, well, she's basically circling all of the notes. How's this micro? Well, I don't actually circle them all. It just kind of looks that way in the beginning. I am circling most of them, but these notes, I'm going to play for you, these micro notes in a moment, and it works. I think it sounds kind of clever. Just some of these bare notes with a few more bare bones added on from what we heard in the macro. These things I'm listening for. Those little scalar figures. And then bum, 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 bum. these kinds of things are what I'm listening for in there, in what you see me writing, as it switches from hand to hand. I hope you can't hear the really quite aggressive and somewhat cringe-worthy sounds that are outside my house. I have there's some folks in the neighborhood who enjoy once in a while on a Sunday in the summertime jamming with a kind of, I guess it's heavy metal, or I don't know, acid rock. I don't know what it's called. It's not my cup of tea. Basically, to me, it sounds like turning the amplifier and strumming the electric guitar as loud as possible and just letting the vibrations like suck you away. I just personally cannot stand it. So here we are, marking in the left-hand part. Yeah, as I say, try to look at this on something other than a phone so that you can actually see these things. And try playing just the blue macro notes and singing them. Then try playing all of the notes and singing the blue macro notes. Then try playing just these micro notes with the red pen around them. Just that. Leave everything else out. And each one of these scenarios, for lack of a better word, is a new experience for the ears. It's like looking at the music under a microscope and magnifying it up really, really close, and then maybe pulling back a little bit. Or like in film, you get a really close up of the actor's face versus a pullback shot or a pan of the scene from left to right. I'm trying to give my ears at the piano the same kind of experience that a good filmmaker would give to your eyes. If the camera stayed in one position for the whole movie, it would be pretty boring. It would lose our interest. And by taking this music apart, breaking up little motives into tiny chunks, extracting bare essentials, putting this with that, combining that with this, your ear gets a new treat each time. And the more you do it, and the more you sing with yourself as you do these things and mark them into your score, the more you'll find complete and eternal wonder and new fresh ideas in this ancient music. I think it was Wanda Landowska, the wonderful harpsichordist of the 20th century. My teacher actually had a class with her, and she said Wanda Landowska was a very good businesswoman. That's what my teacher said. And also that they had a master class. Wanda was giving a master class in New York City. This, I think it must have been in the late 30s or early 1940s. And the class was on New Year's Day, January 1st, in the morning, no less. Oh, my gosh. But the students were there. My teacher was there, Constance Keene, my teacher, and whoever else was in the class, but Wanda was late. Oh, she struck me as someone with quite a bit of personality. But she used to talk about this music and other composers of not just Bach, but other of his contemporaries, and how you must approach it not as frozen meat, old music, like frozen meat in your freezer. You pull it out and defrost it, and then eat it. It's good. It's good to go. Think of it as like, well, I don't like to think of eating meat in general, so that's maybe not the best analogy for me. But, give it fresh life. Be creative with your practicing. That is so essential. I think it was Harold Bauer who talked about this idea of being an explorer at the piano. I don't remember the exact quote, but, you'll have so much wonder. Leschetizky, he also said to a student, he said, believe me, the time you learn the most is when you take your cigarette and go to the window to think it over, not when you are plodding at the piano. That's true. I mean, I'm not an advocate of smoking. I never have, never will smoke. You're welcome to smoke if that's your thing. It's not for me. But the concept of going to the window, of daydreaming, right? All of these things, very, very essential to getting at the heart of the music. Okay, let's hear those micro notes, those notes that I put in red. I'll put the sheet music up there again for you. Okay, so here we go with the micro notes. I'm not going to sing these. I'm playing both hands. So here we go. It's charming, right? It could even be its own little piece. By doing this particular concoction of notes, you notice that I've left out the repeated notes. For instance, in the left hand at the beginning, all these E's in the thumb. Same thing, right hand too. For instance, measure 6 when it has all the A's. These things. That note. I'm just removing the repeated notes, which to my mind are less interesting than the other notes that are changing around them. It's like those notes that I've left out in what you just heard, those repeated notes in particular, those are like the atmosphere, or like the waft of color, or the whipped cream on the brownie. But the actual brownie, you want the brownie. Actually, a cookie is a better analogy for me. I love cookies. And I remember when I was at school in New York, my friends, 2 of them used to tease me because I like cake too, don't get me wrong, but I really like cookies, and they love cake. And they would always tease me because, Penny's first choice is not cake, it's a cookie. It's like, yeah, I love cookies. So we'll use the cookie analogy instead of the brownie. Those macro and even these little micro notes, that's your cookie. But these little notes that I've left out, these repeated notes, they are yummy too, but they don't have anywhere to sit. They're the chocolate sauce, or they're the walnuts on top of the cookie. They need the cookie, So just being able to, that's the other thing in doing these kinds of exercises. And I wasn't taught this exercise. I just concocted these exercises on my own, getting ideas and inspiration here and there, oftentimes away from the piano. But it's just, there's no rules to this. It's just dive into the pool and start in the shallow end and try to swim. And then once you figure it out a little bit, then try some deeper water perhaps. And it works. It's helpful. At least it's helpful for me. Practicing is never boring for me, I must say. And I think if practicing does bore you, then tweak something, because it shouldn't be boring. And if it's boring, then it's going to be hard to get your musical airplane off the ground. But those are those micro notes for you. I do want to just show you one more thing, and then I'll demonstrate just a couple technical spots, perhaps, that might be giving you trouble, and some ideas for how to practice them. Of course, everything we've been doing should in some way help with the overall practice, but some more targeted technical ideas. I'll share a few things there. Okay, and this is just a little recap listed nicely for you there. The statements of the subject, we had 5 of them in the A section, and then the other 3 in the B section. So there were 8 of them total. And you can see here the first 2 notes of each entry. They're moving up by a fourth in each of those. You can see which hand gets each one of those. So we had 4 entries in the right, 4 in the left. The original from measure 1 appears again in the same fashion in measure 7. And the rest have been just a little bit changed. Some of them, I call them alterations. Some of them are a little shorter. Others have a little bit of a slightly different change in the interval structure. But those, to me, are the subject entries for this little prelude. Okay, I'm back to share with you just a few little places that might give you some trouble and how I would go about practicing them. These 8th notes in general, I'm coming off the key. Sorry, I'm coming off the key, kind of like this. Not staccato, not... I don't want like pinpricks in my ear, but just a little detached, a little bit of air in between. Bum, 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 bum. Same thing in the right hand, the left hand rather. And I'm creating that kind of touch by a little bit of a, if you imagine that your hand is wet, and you're shaking it to dry, a little bit of that toss of the hand combined with a bit of a toss from the elbow as well, and a loose upper arm. I would avoid playing the piece very legato and connected. It's certainly easier to play, but it's much more dull and much less brilliant. It's harder to come off the key because then you have as soon as you come off the key, the risk becomes real that you could land on the wrong note. And that is totally okay. That is something to be practiced. So the stronger your fingers get, and the better your eye movements and your ear listening, the better you'll get at being able to land precisely where you need to be. So you can try exaggerating your lifts so they're even way higher than you would normally do for the piece. Just maybe not the whole piece like that, but take a passage and try it so that you're really forcing your hand to prepare itself before arrival. It's just like when you're riding on the airplane, and they put the food and beverage carts away and take your cups and your water and all of this before the descent starts. Otherwise, you got trouble, right? Things falling and rolling all over the place. So think of your hand and your fingers as a little airplane, and they're coming off the key, and you don't want to just land and then, I got to prepare my curved finger or rotate, whatever. Plan for that in advance, and it requires some premeditated planning on your part. It's hard to do, but things to think about. I think one of the main challenges in this piece, technically speaking, is this quasi kind of Alberti bass. These things. Right hand gets them. It's accompanimental material. We get it also in the C minor prelude from Book 1 of Well-Tempered Clavier. the same thing, only that one's in a minor key. Right? This is busy work, running 16ths. This is very not vocal. A singer, you wouldn't hear a singer with this kind of ya-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da. This is very, very pianistic, very keyboardistic type figuration. And the problem with that, as we saw earlier, is that in the case of the left hand, it's those repeated notes. What was I calling them? The whipped cream, right? That's the thumb that gets them. And if you're not careful, you'll get a lot of thumb bumps. Where the thumb is just like a ball and chain. The thumb in this left hand opening is the least interesting of the parts. It's the bottom part of the left hand, like your fifth finger and whatever other fingers you're using for those micro notes. Bum, 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 lam, bum, bum. So some slow practice, listening for good balance so that those repeated notes are light. And instead we're hearing the bottom, the changing notes on the bottom. So sing on these, nice rich on these low notes, and then lighter on your thumb. Light, light, and then here, especially when it's moving by step, measure 2. So we're hearing bum, 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 bum as being more significant and interesting than right? That's not so interesting. So whenever you have that Alberti bass kind of figure with the repeated notes, lighten up the repeated notes and give more richness of tone to the changing notes. And playing those changing notes with the pad of the finger, so you can get a nice rich tone as opposed to a more brittle tone. If you use the tip of the finger, you'll get a much less singing quality to the tone as if you use the pad of the finger. My teacher used to say, for brilliance in piano playing, use a curved finger and play more to the tip. But for the rich, schmaltzy, juicy, delicious legato melodies or any kind of bell-like melodic note that you want to create, use a more flat finger with some arm behind it as well. They're like different colors, but for the ear. Different flavors for the ear. As well, because of these Alberti bass figures, and sometimes they require the hand to be quite open in an octave, and an octave for a small hand could actually be even somewhat uncomfortable, a bit of a stretch. I can reach an octave, no problem. I can reach a ninth as well, fairly comfortably, but beyond that, it's hit or miss. And every hand is different too, so that's why you want to factor that in when you're figuring out your fingering. But one way to get a little bit more strength and independence in your fifth finger for these passages, hold your thumb down. Keep it down, and if it resists, then just gently hold it in place with your other hand. And with the fifth finger, your little pinky, I'm holding this note down with my thumb. With your pinky, just make some forte staccatos. Again, keeping that thumb down. You can hear the E being activated. The overtones here. The overtones are doing that. And then the reverse. Hold your fifth finger down. Got it on E. Keep it down. Again, you can hold it in place gently with the other hand if your finger is too weak. And then make some nice tight staccatos with your thumb. This kind of thing. Go slowly if it's hard for you. Once it gets easier, then pick up the tempo. You could even try holding down a couple of notes in some places. There's places where the third and fourth finger are doing their business. Measure 2. where we're moving down by step. So again, there you could hold your thumb and take the A with a forte staccato. Keep that thumb down, right? And then switch. Do the same thing, holding the fifth finger down, exercising the thumb, and then, of course, in the right hand as well. For me, I had to really kind of try to be clever with my fingering for this piece, and that's why I wanted to show it to you earlier and even to compare it to some other fingering, because there are some passages that are really awkward where the notes are they're moving in sixteenths, but they're quite close together. And combined with that, they'll go one direction and then suddenly it'll switch direction. They're very slippery. This piece is very slippery. This right hand, measure 3 into 4, measure 11, right hand again. This up down, it's tricky. And I find that for that, it's essential to help your fingers a lot by very subtle little lateral side-to-side shifts with your hand. So I'm kind of like a hinge on a cupboard, right? Because we want those crystal clear, sparkling clear, like a Vermeer painting, perhaps. And if you're not, because the fingers are all different lengths, especially the fifth finger and your thumb, the thumb is such a strange finger. It's short, it's fat, it's on the side of the hand. We don't play using the thumb, the pad of the thumb. We play using the side of the thumb, but all the other fingers, we use the pads. So to compensate for the different lengths of fingers, we have to rotate. Otherwise, the poor thumb and fifth finger are only going to get skimmed on their notes. We're just going to, like little cheap, skimpy whiffs of sound. We want them to sound like all the fingers are equally long and capable and strong. And so you can achieve that by this some just lateral shifting from side to side, depending on the contour of the notes and the direction that they're moving. Because this piece is mostly consisting of short note values, 16th notes and 8th notes, we have very few quarter notes. And there's just one half note, and that's at the end, right? So when you get a long note, make a big deal out of it. Give it a really rich singing tone, and that includes our tied notes in the right hand at measure 13. And you can approach those from above the key. You'll get much more singing tone. My teacher, Constance Keene, always talked about you must come off the keys. It just sounds better. The instrument will give you a more rich bell-like singing tone. She also used to say, imagine your pinkies have bells on them. I had such an image in my mind with that little bells on my pinky. But as opposed to playing it from right on the key, where it just kind of sounds like a deflated balloon. But when you approach it from above, it's just like, Technicolor, right? Now, sometimes the second one is you can't really do it because you're coming out of the 16th notes, So you do your best, but when possible, approach from above the key to help it sing and project. And be sure to give it enough power so it can sustain through the tie. Then this piece, I think metronome work is probably good for most of us in this piece, combined with playing the micro notes and then singing the macro notes, playing the individual subject entries. and B section. Whoop. And this kind of thing. I think that's it. Playing those over and over again to get them in your ear, and so that they can punch through the texture when it's their turn. As well, some good technical housekeeping would be just practicing some staccatos in general. And not just be like a robot checking off the box, okay, staccato, here it is, but listening with x-ray ears as you play, assessing every note, the quality of every sound you make, and noticing where is it clear, where is it smudged. If you hear that it's going along well, like this, you're very pleased, but then all of a sudden, oh no, rocks on the road. Don't keep going. Stop your truck, and get out and fix the flat tire or whatever's gone wrong. Go back to that spot. Maybe it was the left hand that went awry. So take your left hand. And as I always like to say, passage work, such as all the 16ths here, break it up into little chunks. Measure 13. The first 3 notes of the bar, even. The first 4 notes of the bar. And then take the back end of that beat. And then do the next thing, the same thing for the next beat. Second beat going into the first note of the third beat. Then coming out of the second beat, going into the third beat. And then and whenever you break things up into little bits and pieces like this, keep a pulse. Otherwise, you may as well just go have pizza. It will be ineffective. But always have pulse. So if I'm breaking it up, feel a pulse. If you're going to do it several times in a row, be sure that the pulse is maintained. 2, 3, 4, and that before you approach the key, it's like the music is already rolling. The track is already playing in your mind. You're already feeling the pulse, and the hand is prepared before it lands on the key. Prepare your passengers on the plane for the descent. Put away the meal trays so they don't have accidents, meatballs on the floor and Chardonnay on the blouse and all of this. And I guess that's really it. I think about these things a lot. And as much as it's really wonderful to have so many different musicians here on YouTube sharing ideas for how to play the piano and how to practice, and much can be learned, and hopefully some fun can be had, and someone in a way keeping you company. But the idea of having an actual teacher is essential, one-on-one lessons, whether they're in person or virtual. That is the best thing, provided it's a good teacher and you feel that it's a good fit. But that is so essential. I think if you're a self-taught person, do try to complement the various tutorials here on YouTube, however good they may be, with some personalized instruction, because I don't know you. I don't know your experiences. I don't know if you have arthritis, or maybe you broke a finger, or maybe you have a keyboard and not a acoustic piano, or maybe you played when you were little and one particular thing was your strength, something else was not. And there's so much information that like a teacher cannot be a good teacher without a good student. And that doesn't mean that the student is like destined for Carnegie Hall, but that both are committed and have a passion and a desire to grow together, because teachers learn from students too. So just keep that in mind. I really think it's essential to have your own teacher. But I do like making videos, and I hope that these are helpful. And so that completes this practice tutorial for the little prelude in E major, BWV 937. We're trying new things here on the channel, and I never thought I'd be getting into the sidewalk chalk, but there's a first for everything. So if this was helpful to you, or if you have some ideas for other things you'd like to see videos made, devoted to, do please let me know. And I appreciate all of your comments. Thank you for them, as well for your likes, and thank you for subscribing. If you're new here, thank you very much, and I hope that these videos are helpful and pleasant. Try to be friendly. I'm going to send you out into the world with one more little quote from Leschetizky. We already said how he thought we English speakers do not smile enough as we talk. He also says, can't you smile? Smile in your playing, and smile in your heart too. That said, deep sorrow and suffering are also some of the biggest growth tools for playing with expression. Leschetizky says that I know from firsthand experience that that is true. So blending that with a smile in your heart and smart practice habits. Okay, so without further ado, I will wrap this show up. Thank you for watching. Happy practicing to you. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon for more performances of Bach's music and practice tips. Bye-bye. Honestly, guys, I hate to leave this. I'm kind of attached to it. Aw, Mr. B at the playground.